So I have just pushed record. I'm going to record the session because I've had quite a few messages from those who registered who weren't able to make it this evening. And so at the end of the 3 days, I will send the three recordings of the three evenings so that everybody who couldn't make it, who maybe can't stay for the whole 45 minutes, can just watch the recordings. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes and then we will begin. If anybody who's actually on at the moment could tell me whether that you can see my presentation. I should have shared the screen, but it because I've come back into having a look at helping people come in, I can't see whether it's actually being shared or not. Thank you, Maria. Perfect. Good evening. Thank you for joining me. Give it another couple of minutes, just till 5 past, to see if anybody else is able. But I really say welcome to those who were able to make it on a Tuesday evening. It's really tricky to find a time which is suitable for everybody, but there will be recordings. So for anybody who obviously isn't here, so isn't seeing this message, but there will be recordings sent out. And if you have to leave early because your evening is carrying on, then you will get the recordings as well. Hello, hello. I've also just put everybody on mute because sometimes things can happen in our houses behind us. I have got a dog. If I hear barking, I will try and ignore it and move on. Hopefully, it won't be her at this time of night, but we do all have background noise that we can't avoid. So, one more minute and then I will make a start. So just the last thing, I would like to make this as interactive as I can, bearing in mind I'm giving you quite a lot of information. I've spread um, the information over 3 nights because there's quite a lot to take in, and I didn't want to overwhelm in one really long, drony kind of session. Some of the kind of interaction prompts that I will ask, you can write down on a piece of paper or in the notes on your telephone. So, feel free to just kind of go and grab a pen and paper or whatever that you can make a note with. And sometimes I'll ask you to put any comments in the chat so that we can maybe have a discussion about it and make it a little bit less static than my presentation. Right, it's 5 past, so I think we're going to make a start. So, thank you very much again for joining us to this Unraveling the Eczema Trap. So, I'm Jessica Fonteneau. I'm a registered nutritional therapist. I have been practicing for the past coming on for 11 and a half years, and I work very much in the eczema or dermatitis fields. I also work a lot with other conditions, including psoriasis, lots of digestive health issues. I work with a medical clinic 2 days a week across a wide variety of conditions. But really, my area of dedication and research focus has always been eczema and dermatitis. And that's because I've had atopic eczema since I was 6 months old. In my master's, I did a dissertation and it was all about atopic eczema. So dermatitis eczema isn't just about atopy, it's about lots of other things. And that's how I've come to developing my program, the Eczema Trap, or escaping from the eczema trap, or calming the eczema trap, all kinds of ways that we can deal with that eczema trap. And the idea is that over my 11 years of working in practice and working with one-to-one clients, I saw these general themes coming again and again and again. But the most important thing to know about those themes was that no two people had the same underlying issues to do with our eczema. So I've chosen to call them strands because I feel that they are things that intertwine with us and our eczema and that are really the foundational points that trigger flares. So over the next 2 days, we're going to be looking at the most important strands that I think are involved with dermatitis or eczema. And I've started today with things that are happening. I mean, everything really is focused about inside your body, but loosely kind of inside your body. And the first strands I'm going to be exploring, I'll explore 5 today and then 5 tomorrow evening. And then on day 3, we'll do a bit of work about exploring about which of the strands are the most applicable potentially to each of you. But today's strands that we're exploring is the elimination strand, which is one of the main things that people come to me in their first consultation. They come and say, I've eliminated lots of things, but I'm just eliminating more and more. And I still can't see the wood for the trees, and I still don't know what it is I'm reacting to. Then the gut restore strand, because we all know, you will have seen from my page, you've obviously already found me, but also if you Google eczema, that skin gut connection is so prevalent. So it's a really important part of the picture. And then a strand that I wanted to include was a reintroduction, idea of reintroduction strand. People are so good at eliminating, but that reintroduction piece, expanding our diet so that they're the most varied as possible, is a really important part of a long-term dermatitis picture. Then inflammation. Inflammation is at the base of any eczema flare, and nutrient replenish. And I say replenish because when we're coming out of an eczema flare or we've had a chronic long-term eczema flare, we've used a lot of nutrients that have been trying to heal our body and have been trying to just support that inflammation. So those are the strands that we are working with today. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, well then let's move on. So today's strand, is the first. It's all about what happens inside that shapes your skin. And I've waffled and waffled without moving any of my slides. I've talked about this already about eczema isn't caused by the one thing, it's a trap with multiple strands, and it depends what strands affect you because we don't all have the same strands. And these are the strands that I am focusing on. So now I can focus on the right strand. The first strand I wanted to focus on is the elimination strand because it is very, very important. And it's all about simplifying the food trigger confusion. So I often talk about elimination diets and the gut as the important first step. We want to give that gut a little bit of a pause. But we're not all allergic or intolerant or even sensitive to foods. Sometimes it is just the gut that is reacting. The gut I often talk about as being an overtired toddler. If anybody in this group is a parent, they'll know what I'm talking about. And I'm sorry for those of you who aren't and who may not quite see the visual picture that I'm trying to put across. When a toddler is overtired, you can offer them the best ice cream in the world and they will still collapse on the floor and beat their feet and just sob because they're overtired, they cannot think anymore, and nothing is going to go past. And I say the same with the gut. There comes a point where the gut has been under pressure, whether it's because there is a food that they've decided that it's decided it doesn't like anymore, that whether there is a genuine trigger that is causing some damage, whether there's general inflammation in the body that's having a downward effect on the gut, whether the skin microbiome is out of kink, which has made the gut microbiome out of kink. There are so many different permutations, but the gut can suddenly turn around and say, I'm not going to like this food anymore, and I'm going to just react and then make your skin flare. You can take that food out, and then you might get this lovely pause moment. And if it's a genuine trigger, genuine intolerance, allergy, or sensitivity, then that can be long lasting. I have a genuine egg issue, and as long as I stay away from egg, my eczema doesn't flare and I'm absolutely fine. But if it isn't, if it's because of a host of other reasons, the gut can say, okay, well, that was lovely. That was a lovely pause. I really enjoyed that, but now I'm a little bored. And I'm going to now go off and pick, oh, look, she's eating a lot of X, Y, and Z. I'm going to decide I don't like that now. And then you start reacting to this new food and food that you've been eating and you never had a problem with, and then suddenly that becomes the issue. So then you start taking that out. And that's why people who come to see me in one-to-one consultations often say to me, oh, but no, I can't eat any of these foods. And when I see this great big long list and see the restrictive foods they're on, I'm like, okay, the issue is not the sensitivities, or there might be one or maybe two. The issue is your gut. So moving on to the gut. So the next, please excuse me, I'm actually just, it's my first day back, I'm recovering from flu. So please excuse me for a little hoarseness and an occasional cough. So the next one is the gut. So the gut lining is the skin barrier inside out. Our gut is literally a tube. It it just goes through our whole body coming from, and it is like having a skin barrier. It blocks larger particles of foods and other molecules from getting through from the food we've eaten and we're digesting into our bloodstream. But if our gut lining is not a happy bunny, as I mentioned a minute ago, then we can have larger particles of those foods going through. And instead of it being an actual reaction or an allergic, a genuine allergenic reaction, it can just be that there was a larger particle that was identified by the immune system as problematic, and then you start having a reaction. So you already see that there are, a few scenarios about when the gut might come into play and start causing issues. And then we have other issues in the gut that you may have heard of. Bacterial overgrowth, whether it's in the large intestine or whether it's a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. All of these cause issues. Low stomach acid means that we don't digest sufficiently, which means that the nutrients coming into the intestine haven't been fully digested and can also cause issues. Sluggish digestion. Let's say we have a little bit of an issue with constipation, or we have a little bit of a slow bowel. Well, that means that things that our liver have detoxified aren't being excreted. So everything has an impact on everything else. And that's another reason why I say these strands are intermeshed. There isn't kind of one, oh, well, it's just that one strand. They all have an impact on each other. The good news is that most of us have a one, two, maybe three dominant strands. And once we get those in order, then the downstream cascade of beneficial effects mean that the other ones that were potentially in play originally no longer are an issue. So small tip is the supporting with fiber, bitters, and probiotics when tolerated. We're all different, and I would really say, proceed with caution. I'm not a massive supplement somebody who recommends lots and lots of supplements, because I believe that we should do things with the food first. And the reality is that if you're an adult with dermatitis, you're likely to have it long term. And this is all a question about helping support and modulate and cope with your flares, rather than saying there is a magic broccoli wand and it's all going to disappear. I've had eczema since I was 6 months old. I really know my trigger. I know how to modulate it. But this summer, for example, I was promised there was no egg in something. Sorry, 1 second. And that wasn't entirely true. I had a flare. The flare lasted for 8 weeks. Once it was up, that's another thing I say about eczema. like a diva, loves to bounce on the scene and is really slow to leave the stage, wants to hog that limelight. So, it takes time. But because I know all of the steps, I know what are part of my strands, I know all of the pieces of the puzzle, then I put everything in place. And then instead of staying chronic and staying long term and me still having it, I have no eczema left. So, is anybody happy to share on the chat if there's any foods that you might suspect is a trigger for you, even if you're not totally sure, just so that we can interact a little bit? Otherwise, I'm going to blow this very quick through this very quickly. Anybody? Or has anybody noticed that they have skin flares after having some bloating or constipation or any other digestive symptoms? Oh, Susanna, dairy, cow's milk. Oh, two of you, dairy. Now I'm going to ask you another question. All dairy, or are you better with some types of dairy? Anybody going to answer? You think goat's dairy is okay. Okay, so there's another little nuance to it. For some people, what I call wet dairy or fresh dairy, so something like a mozzarella, some people tolerate that fine. And then they have a real problem with something much more mature or fermented, like a mature cheddar or a parmesan. So there are many strands to these kind of different foods um, that might trigger it and for different reasons. Gemma, trying to identify the triggers for over a year, but still not sure what they are. But alcohol is definitely one. Yeah, unfortunately, alcohol is one, and we'll talk about that tomorrow in the liver strand because there is a liver strand. Um, it can be really tricky to find our own triggers, and it isn't always food. I want to be very clear on that. Sometimes it's environmental or chemical, and I'll be covering that also tomorrow. Sometimes it's hormonal. That's tomorrow's subject as well. There are lots of things. And nobody mentioned whether they had any skin flares with digestive symptoms. Or or an easier question, does anybody in this group who's struggling with eczema actually also have digestive symptoms? Silence. So I think maybe not, which is good news. Okay. So on to the next strand, which is the reintroduction. So it's all very nice, as I said right at the beginning, to start eliminating foods. Don't delete. We eliminate foods. But once we've kind of taken it, pared it down, given everything a little bit of a rest, maybe given our gut a little bit of support to heal, and become a little bit more robust so that it's functioning better and is not allowing these larger particles to get through, then it's really important. And this is the part lots of people don't forget. It's really important to reintroduce. So there's one factor that you need to bear in mind. When you've taken a food out for quite a long time, it's actually a little bit harder to reintroduce them into your diet. And it may be that you have some um, symptoms, not necessarily skin symptoms, but maybe digestive symptoms when you reintroduce something. And I often say it's like having an outdoor tap, one of those taps that you use for watering your garden and you don't use it for the whole of the winter. And then when you come to the spring, you switch it back on, it splutters a bit, coughs, spits out some brown water, and then eventually runs clear. It's the same thing when you're starting to reintroduce things into your body. Your body has coped and your gut has coped differently. Um, so reintroductions is a whole routine. It needs to be done really carefully, and very methodically so that you're very clear if something has caused a reaction, what type of reaction, and whether to proceed or whether to stop. So it's also not about just saying dairy, for example. We've had two people today that talked about dairy, but it's dairy is a massive category. And as I said earlier, I'm really sorry about the coughing. Like I said earlier, um, different types of dairy might be okay to other types of dairy. So what we have to do is break down each of the categories to reintroduce so that we are crystal clear what can be eaten and what can't be eaten. And sometimes you have a little bit of a equivocal answer to it. So, there are some things that you put back in, and, I can consider them green foods, and you're like, they're fine. I put it back in, nothing happened, no skin, no digestive, no headaches, no nothing else. Then you have other foods where you have an immediate reaction. Me and egg. I can eat just one bite of something which has got egg in it, and within 5 minutes, my hands are swelling, and then I get these, I say they're like sausages, they swell and they split, basically, and I get these crevices. So that's an absolute immediate reaction, and I have tried so hard because I love eggs, to reintroduce them year after year after year. I give it 6, 8 months and then try again. Not been successful so far. I still live in absolute hope. And then there are other things which I call the kind of amber category, and they're things that you reintroduce them and you think you have a little bit of a reaction, or you don't have a reaction immediately, but it may be a bit delayed. And they're things where I say, okay, we'll do a pause and then retry. So there is a method to the reintroduction, but you really want to gain clarity. And I beg of you not to be scared of foods. Most of the foods you'll be able to, my experience in clinic is most of the foods can be reintroduced over time safely. Then we're going to cover the inflammation layer. Sorry, I did have a question about the last one. I'm not very good about reading my notes. So my question, which you could either put in your own notebook or if you want to share here, is there one food that you want to write down that you would say you'd love to bring back with confidence? Okay. Hopefully you've written that down or you know it and it was so obvious you didn't need to do that. So this is the next strand is inflammation. So inflammation underpins all eczema. Inflammation is when it's red and it's hot and it's swollen, which so much of dermatitis and eczema is. That's the inflammation. Inflammation trigger the downstream symptoms of the itch, and so many of the skin symptoms that we write and everybody can recognize as dermatitis. And inflammation can be driven by lots of things. So we've already talked about the food. Somebody's mentioned alcohol, but there's also things like poor sleep, too much sugar consumption. Stress is an enormous one, and there is a stress strand. So sometimes we have to take a step back and say, well, we can take all the foods out and we can really try and heal the gut. But whilst the inflammation is still driving, there is still something triggering that inflammation, and it's none of those. And then it's still driving the damage to the gut and causing there to be sensitivities to certain foods. Then we're not going to get anywhere. And we really need to calm that internal fire and calm the skin. So, it's like you have to think about inflammation as a fire alarm that won't go off. It's ringing, it's ringing, it's ringing. And then your immune system almost becomes too switched on and you can't switch it off because it's just going and going and going. So every strand in the 10 strands that I've developed actually helps turn down this inflammation, this fire. So whilst it's a strand on its own, all of the strands are aiming for the root cause of the inflammation. So can anybody share or have any ideas about what non-skin symptoms might be linked to inflammation? I might have mentioned a couple of them a couple of slides ago. Arthritis, absolutely. Anybody else? So, arthritis, migraine, brilliant. Yep. IBS. Yeah, I would say that is a sign of some inflammation. It's also digestive issues. So going back to that gut, things so I had written down two of the ones that you've got. I've got headaches, joint pain, so arthritis and migraines, and fatigue. If you're constantly exhausted, it shows that your body is on high alert all the time and that inflammation is raging, or it can do. So, there's a lot that we can see with inflammation, and inflammation really is that first core step. We want to calm that down. We want it to be doing its job, protecting us from viruses, bacteria, etc., but not working all the time. It needs to go on and then it needs to go off, and then we need to be able to replenish and restore and take a bit of a breath and not be so tired and not be on all the time. And then the last strand I'm going to talk about today is the replenish your nutrients. So this isn't a strand in the same sense as the elimination or the reintroduction, or where it's the basis of some things. Because going back to the reintroduction, an important part of the reintroduction is we really need a varied diet to support our gut health, our microbiome, and also part of all of the nutrients we need to build, to repair our skin cells and all of our cells and be the foundation for all of our health, which is why I've talked about them together tonight, because they kind of go together. You can't have one with the other. We can't replenish the nutrients if we haven't reintroduced the foods. So key skin nutrients include zinc, really important for healing, vitamin D, omega-3s, protein. You will have seen about it. I talk about them all the time on my page, so please feel free to go back to Instagram or my website. Sorry, apologies. On my website, I've written countless articles about it with all of the nutrients that you need to help skin health. Depletion is common in chronic eczema. Depletion not only because we're using up all of those nutrients to try and repair constantly, and if we've got the inflammation going, then we're using lots of nutrients for the inflammation that are then causing damage to the skin, which we're then constantly trying to repair. So I don't know if you can hear how much we're depleting all of those nutrients and how many more that we need than maybe, some other people that don't have this constant inflammation. Your skin is always turning over and rebuilding, but it can only do that if the raw materials are there. And many eczema clients are unintentionally, because they've eliminated foods or and they're frightened of reintroducing some foods, are unintentionally undereating or missing key building blocks. So this strand is all about fueling your body like you're in recovery, because you are. When we're having a dermatitis flare, we're constantly fueling our recovery. So my next question to you is, which nutrient feels most missing from your current habits, or which one do you think that you should like to focus more on? Zinc, brilliant. Protein and omega-3s. Perfect. I know I'd written them in the side, but zinc is really, really important. So, if you go to Dr. Google and ask zinc foods, things like pumpkin seeds, include them in your daily diet. If you're suffering from chronic long-term eczema and your skin is constantly trying to repair itself, it needs more zinc than normal. Protein, absolutely. Without the amino acids to help rebuild our skin, we're not going anywhere. And the omega-3s are slightly different, but also incredibly important. We're always told when we go and see the GP or the dermatologist, we're told moisturize, moisturize, moisturize. But we also need some moisturization from the inside. So omega-3s help support that. Now, there's something else. We need other fats as well. People with eczema actually are quite deficient in omega-9s and omega-7s. So we really need a blend. What happens in today's world is that we usually have a ratio. So we eat a lot more omega-6 foods, and it's more of the balance between the omega-6s and the omega-3 foods that is important rather than specific numbers of each. Does that make sense, or does anybody have any questions about that? It's not like WhatsApp. I can't see little dots if somebody's talking. What are omega-3 nines and omega-7s? They're just different types of omegas. So they're just different types of fat. And of course, I'm like a rabbit in headlights, and I've just um give me 1 minute as my as I look at my notes because I've somebody's asked me a question and I've gone completely blank. Having said they're very important. Um, so macadamia nuts are a good source of omega-7. Anchovies, sardines, and other cold water fish also have omega-7. And even though you think of sardines as having omega-3s, which they do have as well, but the colder the fish, the more they have sources also of omega-7. Avocado is a good source of omega-7. Avocado can be tricky for people with eczema. Some people don't tolerate it because it's part of the lanolin family. And for some people, it's high histamine. And I cover histamine and MCAS as eczema triggers and strands tomorrow. And then omega-9s, those are ones that you've heard of. If you've got you do have to think that most foods sources of omega um, 6, 3, 7, and 9 have got a little bit of a proportion of each in them. So again, omega-9s is olive oil. That's the most richest source of omega-9. Avocados, almonds, hazelnuts, cashews, and other nuts if we're not intolerant to them, sesame oil, but also chicken has it. But it's not the preferred source and it is less available. Okay, had your levels tested and a much higher omega-6 and was depleted in omega-3. So yeah, rebalancing that ratio, raising your omega-3 while lowering your omega-6 would be really helpful. Anybody else got any other questions they wanted to ask about that? Okay, so tomorrow night I'm going to be covering the next strands. So the next strands are, in no particular order, just the order they're coming into my mind, hormones, stress, environmental and chemical sensitivities, that's one strand combined, histamine and MCAS, and the final one is liver support. Though that makes up the 10. When I first thought about writing and developing these strands, I only had four. And then the more I wrote, the more I realized some of these topics were large enough to stand on their own and that they really needed to be addressed on their own. So I've actually developed programs for each of the strands, and they have self-paced program or at your expert's pace. I often tell my one-to-one clients that we go at the at the pace of the eczema, not at the pace of how long I've given you. We go at the eczema's pace. So there's modules that you go at your pace with lots of handouts, things that you can print off and keep. Because as I've always told all of my clients, I really want to give you the tools. Just like I said earlier about myself, my flare will come back. I will get egged at some point, or something else will happen, and I will have an eczema flare. And I need to just put all of those learnings that I have, the things that I know that work for me, back into place. Because we can get a little bit lazy about it and we can think, oh no, I'm all right now. I can now get away with a bit more than I thought I could. So having all of this information, and this learning gives you the control back into your hands, which is all I want to be able to do. Each separate stand has its own recipe booklet with recipes that are adapted specifically for that strand. And there are 21 breakfasts, 21 lunches, and 21 dinners, because I've done 7 omnivore recipes, 7 vegan, and 7 vegetarian. So there should be enough of a variety and a selection for everyone. And you'll have the principles of how to eat in the modules. So you'll also be able to go out and come up with your own recipes. I've also included in each of the standalone program session a chat function. So on there, you'll be able to scroll up and see questions that other people have asked, or you can ask your question, and I will be alerted when questions appear in the chat and I will answer them. So whilst you don't get to work with me one-to-one, I wanted to offer something for those people who couldn't work with somebody one-to-one, or who didn't want to work with somebody one-to-one. But that still has some of my input. Just 2 very important points. The programs are only available for over 18s. I work a lot with infants and children and young teenagers and young adults. Well, at young adults, they're over 18, but anything below. And it's very nuanced. We don't do wholesale elimination diets for infants or young children. So my programs are general information, they're general principles, they haven't been personalized to an individual, so they are not appropriate for infants and young children. And then the last thing I'm going to say is at the moment, only 3 of the programs are available, which are the elimination, the reintroduction, and the gut restore, because it's taken me, they got bigger and bigger. So here's the honest truth. In a month's time, another 2 will be coming online, and we're getting them out as quickly as we possibly can. Does anybody have any question about any of the material that I covered tonight? I haven't quite finished my presentation for tomorrow, so was there anything that you thought was that could have done with having deeper detail or more information that I can make sure that I cover and get the right information for you guys tomorrow? Well, if I don't hear, I will do more of the same. I was wondering if you do a bit on chlorine. Yep, I'm doing the environmental and chemical sensitivities tomorrow. So I will make a note about chlorine, and would love to see sample recipes. I can give you some ideas if that's all right, Gemma, tomorrow night. Give me a chance to just quickly pull some of those together and include them in tomorrow's presentation. Is that okay? Perfect. Well, if nobody has any other questions, I will be setting up the recording for tonight. Um, you'll receive it on you'll receive it on Thursday evening after the last session. And if anybody is interested in the programs, then you will also get a coupon to say thank you very much for attending and for listening to me, and for sharing your thoughts and feedback. Okay, well, I can quickly cover that question, Gemma. It would be good to talk about conventional eczema treatments and how they might work alongside a holistic approach. Absolutely. So, to be very clear, I'm a practitioner who believes in integrative medicine. So, integrative medicine means the working side by side, integrating both the conventional treatments and supporting things like nutrition and lifestyle. So I have in my cupboard some hydrocortisone. And when I have a flare and when my fingers swell and crack and crevice, and I can feel the pulse at the end of one of them at 3 o'clock in the morning, I get up and I use some hydrocortisone. I also put in place the nutrition and lifestyle um, recommendations that I know work for myself, because the hydrocortisone absolutely smooths and is an absolute lifesaver. And I will tell all of my clients, you must absolutely have whatever you've been prescribed by your GP or dermatologist. But the hope is that if you're supporting alongside, then potentially that flare will be less long, and less severe and less chronic, so that you won't need to use the medications for as long as you might have done previously. So, yes, continue with the conventional eczema treatments. Broccoli takes time, and we need to underpin it so that if you reduce the inflammation, those medications can work better and hopefully you can stop using them. But you should always have them in your cupboard just in case. Does that answer your question, Gemma? Perfect. Okay, so tomorrow evening I will show some recipes. I will cover the chlorine question in the chemical and environmental sensitivity strand. Thank you very much for spending your evening with me. The recordings will come on Thursday with a coupon, and you have my email address is info@jessicafonteneaunutrition.com. So, or if you're on the Practice Better system and you activate it, you have access to a chat function, so you can ask me questions on there. I really aim to help other people because I was told by doctors for years and years there was nothing that could be done, there was nothing that could be done. And I found a practitioner who showed me the way, and I've never looked back. So have a lovely evening. I won't keep you any longer. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow evening. Take care. Oh, and thank you, Susanna. Yeah, I'll try not to cough and splutter through tomorrow. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye.